Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, The Sea Poet, Poetry Ungovernable, and in today's video we are going to talk about allusion. So when you're talking about allusion, this is a literary device that is used in poetry where the poet indirectly references a place, a person, or a source, or an event from history, from religion, from literacy, or from a myth. So here we are looking at the fact that the poet is indirectly referencing something, someone from history that is not exactly in the poem. So when you're talking about types of allusion, you're talking about mythological, you're also talking about historical, you're talking about religious or literary. And I'll give you an example in a few minutes. However, when it is very important to note that when a poet is using these types of referencing and hitting at something, there is a reason for it. But before we also get to the reasons, it's important that the poet remembers that the audience needs to actually be understanding what you're talking about. Otherwise, they're going to be lost. So for example, if you are referencing to a religious figure or an event or a source, for example, the Bible, let's use the Bible as a source, and you want to talk about wisdom, the poet may go ahead and refers to Solomon because Solomon was a wise king in the Bible. He's a biblical character. If, for example, you are talking about a literary figure, you may consider figures that actually the audience may be knowledgeable about. For example, Romeo and Juliet, those are literary figures that are actually very much famous to most people, and people can actually relate to them. If you're talking about historical figures, for example, here in Kenya, you may consider the types of Tom Mboya, Wangua Makeri. Such are historical figures that actually people have learned them in school historically and they understand them. So whatever issue you're talking about and you reference to them, you will be actually bringing in the audience. And finally, the fourth type, which we are saying is a mythological type of an allusion. You are referencing to something in the myths. So you must be sure the cultural norms around the people you are talking to in your audience. If, for example, you give a myth that nobody has no idea what you're talking about, everybody will expect maybe you expound on it, and then it actually destroys the whole meaning of allusion in poetry. Because in poetry, with allusion, you're just hinting to something for the following benefits. One, to evoke a mental picture in the audience of what you're talking about. If you're talking about wisdom and you bring in Solomon and everybody's like, that is about wisdom, this poem is about wisdom, and it will be easier for them to follow through. However, if you are maybe, for example, talking about love and you reference a person that is not Romeo and Juliet, and for example, you reference, let me give you an example, you reference the case of Bogwa. I think he's a historical figure, not a historical, he just happened to have been on the news a few years back, and you're maybe talking about it in a poem that is, you're reading it out maybe in the US, nobody will have an idea what you're talking about, so you may lose them. So the whole idea is to evoke a mental picture so that you can create an imagery and you are bringing in your audience to exactly understand what you're talking about in your poem. There is another type of an allusion. I wouldn't call it a type, but I would call it maybe a class. When we have referenced historical, we have referenced religious, we have referenced literacy, we have referenced mythological, you may happen to have noticed these are things outside the text of the poem and the reasons we have seen for what you are doing it for. However, there are poets who go ahead and create their own literary allusion in maybe the first stanza and start referencing to it in the second or the third or the fourth or even to the end of the poem. This type of an allusion is called an internal allusion. A few poets do it, but those who do it very well, and it's a very good way also of illustrating an allusion in a poem. All right, I will go to my poems, get you to understand some of the few examples more and more on this literary device. See you in a few minutes. Yeah, allow me to read for you this poem that I just wrote a few days. I have actually posted it on my Facebook page, The Sea Poet, or on Instagram if you're following me there as well, The Sea Poet.
Oh, come all ye faithful, over 100 years ago they called. We left our nakedness behind because they said it was wickedness. Naked we were, but didn't we have morality? Traditions that stemmed from originality? A wife was off limits, stealing was with an army, raid after raid. How then is being clothed righteous when men of God still alone as our wives bathe in baptism naked? The happening of Uriah sounds familiar, but we still worship the God of King David because we are forgiven thieves, because morality was too harsh, an eye for an eye, can you even? But Christianity is full of grace, a slap on the cheek we turn the other for them to slap even harder. Is this the gospel they called us to?
In that poem that you have just read, you realize there are two types of allusion. One, religious allusion, and two, historical allusion. The first allusion is very easy to identify because if you are a Christian or you have read the Bible, you happen to know who is King David and who was Uriah. So it's easy to create a mental imagery on what the poet is talking about. And the other type of an allusion that is very subtle, and you may not really know it unless you're in the cultural issues of African society, is the reference to how attacks used to happen. Raids by raid. It used to be in an army, not alone, and all that. That is historical to how the Kenyan societies used to have their fights, and not alone. They used to be in an army, and all the types of raids that used to happen village from village. So that is historical, but you must be from the Kenyan society to really understand that. However, the poet has continued to depict a little bit by explaining further so that you're able to understand it, even though it's a historical reference that you may not be much aware of. Thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have learned something about allusion. If you have any comments, kindly write them in my comments below, and continue to subscribe kindly and hit the notification bell so that you can get more of my videos. All right, thank you and goodbye.